When William was born, which was just a bit over 8 years ago, William was our first child. And so, the first child comes and your world just changes. Everything changes. You start learning things you didn't know before, and your schedule changes, and everything just seems to change. And I recall that there was one thing in particular that I just happened to be attentive to for whatever reason around the time when William was born. In fact, the day and the day after William was born, for some reason, the thing that stuck out to me was bath time. Now, I knew that when we got home with William that bath time was going to be my thing. I wanted to do bath time, and we had talked about Daddy's going to do bath time, but I didn't know exactly, how bath time works, because I'd never done bath time for an infant before. So in the hospital, I recall when William was born and received his first bath by the nurse, I was trying to be extra attentive, to learn a lot, and to figure out how do you do this, and what do you not do, and what do you do. So I was hovering, and I was attentive while the nurse was giving this first bath. And what I remember is that the nurse was just pulling and yanking and pounding and, pouring water on him, and he was wailing, and there was water everywhere, and then she put soap on her hands, like a bottle of soap, and then she just rubbed it all down with the soap, and hey, this skin, it's precious, it's a skin, and then she, dumped more water on him, and he'd cry and go everywhere, and, she'd pick him up and pound him down, and, this is our child. He was just born, he weighs like a gallon of milk. This is not a lot. Just, be gentle. And that's what I was thinking, just be gentle, be sweet, and be tender, and be soft. That's what I'm thinking. And so when I looked up in the dictionary, I saw this great definition of gentleness. Gentleness is perfect for describing the way someone acts when they're soft and calm and sweet to other people. That's gentle. And so when we read the fruit of the Spirit and we see Paul say that the fruit of the Spirit is love and joy and peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and gentleness, immediately my mind goes to sweet and tender and soft. And that is part of what Paul meant. But there's another side to the Bible's sense of gentleness. And if we miss this side of it, all we think sweet is soft and tender and calm. And there's a whole other side to it. So we're going to look at that side of gentleness. Gentleness, I don't know if you've had this reaction, but reading through the list of the fruit of the Spirit, I've had the reaction of, why did gentleness make the list? Because, it makes sense that the others did. Like love. It's kind of obvious. Love is all over the Bible. God is love. Makes sense. Joy, absolutely. God brings joy. There's joy all over the Bible. There's examples of joy. Peace, it passes all understanding. We get peace. Patience, surely the Bible talks a lot about patience and us needing patience. Kindness, that's kind of like grace. And so we get what we don't deserve. We get that. That's very biblical. Goodness, we're created to be good and for good works. So good makes sense. Faithfulness, for sure. Faith is a huge topic and theme in the Bible. Makes sense that faithfulness is there. And then the last one, self-control. We'll get to that next week. But gentleness just seems like the odd fruit out. It doesn't seem like the one that at least I would pick to make this list. And I wonder sometimes, why did gentleness make the list? Also, you look at the other fruit of the Spirit, and we've talked, as we've looked through these fruit, that all the others, they appear all over the Bible. Like hundreds of times you find love or faith or joy or peace. There's examples everywhere. God is described that way. There's people who experience these things. We've got lots of examples. But when it comes to gentleness, I just can't think of a lot of passages or a lot of stories or a lot of examples where the lesson is to be gentle, or where this person acted gently, or there's examples of gentleness. They're just not there nearly as much as the others. There are a few. Most of them appear in the New Testament, and we'll get to those in a little bit, but there's one specific one that appears in the Old Testament, and it teaches a brilliant thing about gentleness. So we're going to look at that one. It's in Isaiah chapter 40. And if Isaiah chapter 40 at all rings a bell, It should, because it's one of these chapters that has some of the most famous phrases of the Bible. It's some that we quote, it's some that are in greeting cards, it's some that give us strength and encouragement, and it has lots of these famous types of passages. A couple of them are, make a straight path through the desert for our God. Now that's the John the Baptist passage. We dusted off during Christmas and we talked about that one. Another part of it is the grass withers and the flowers fade, but the word of the Lord lasts forever. That's part of this Isaiah chapter 40. And then there's also the one at the end, which people often find a lot of comfort and strength in. And that's the one that says, have you never heard, have you never understood? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of all the earth. He never grows weak or weary. And then it ends with, those who trust in the Lord will find new strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will walk and not grow weary. I mean, this is the Isaiah 40 kind of flavor. In the first half of Isaiah chapter 40, that's where we get on our topic. It's written out in your bulletin. We only have half the chapter because it's really long, so we're just going to look at this half. But here is the first half of Isaiah chapter 40. And we might hear some other familiar types of phrases in this one too. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem. Tell her that her sad days are gone and her sins are pardoned. Yes, the Lord has punished her twice over for all her sins. Listen, it's the voice of someone shouting, clear the way through the wilderness for the Lord. Make a straight highway through the wasteland for our God. Fill in the valleys and level the mountains and hills. Straighten the curves and smooth out the rough places. Then the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all the people will see it together. The Lord has spoken. Does some of this sound at least a little bit familiar? We may have heard some of this before. It goes on. A voice said, shout. I asked, what should I shout? Shout that people are like the grass. Their beauty fades as quickly as the flowers in a field. The grass withers and the flowers fade beneath the breath of the Lord, and so it is with people. The grass withers and the flowers fade, but the word of our God stands forever. O Zion, messenger of good news, shout from the mountaintops. Shout it louder, O Jerusalem. Shout and do not be afraid. Tell the towns of Judah, your God is coming. Yes, the sovereign Lord is coming in power. He will rule with a powerful arm. See, he brings his reward with him as he comes. He will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will carry the lambs in his arms, holding them close to his heart. He will gently lead the mother sheep with their young. And this is just half the chapter. It goes on, and that's where we end up with the soaring on wings like eagles, running and not growing weary, walking and not fainting. And that's where that part ends. And you read this chapter, and the feeling I get at least is, I want to stand up and say, yes, God is strong, and yes, God is powerful, and God can pull us through, and God can do anything that God wants to do, and this is good. It's one of those rallying, great, exciting kinds of chapters. So here's a little map or comparison. The whole chapter is 31 verses, and 29 of those verses talk about God's power or God's strength or these kinds of powerful, strong things that God does. And the other 2 verses talk about gentleness. Now, when I see that, I see, strict data, and I see 90+% power and strength, less than 10% gentleness. This is not a chapter on God's gentleness. But it is. And that's the cool part. Remember back to first and second grade. Anybody remember first and second grade? Just clear as a bell, right? Okay, good. Now, those of you that are experiencing first or second grade, or who have recently experienced it, do you remember that one of the things you learned in first and second grade is writing? Like writing an organized, structured paragraph. Yes? Okay, now I'm going to rely on you, and maybe some of you who can hearken back to first and second grade, to remember there are a few parts of a well-structured paragraph, a well-organized paragraph. There might be 3 main components to a paragraph. Yes? What are some of those components? A body. You've got to have a strong body in your paragraph. Exactly, that's component number 2. What would be component 1 and 3 of a structured, good, organized paragraph? A topic sentence. A good beginning. We need a strong beginning, something clear, a thesis, a topic, something clear to get us in. And then what would be the 3rd component? A strong ending, another word for an ending might be a conclusion. That's right. So we have an introduction or a topic sentence or a thesis. We have a main body with good key details, and we have an ending that has a good conclusion that seals the whole thing up and reminds us what we're talking about. This is nothing new. This is not just Shannon Ridge School or Oak Grove School or Green Acres School. This is not just Visalia. This is timeless stuff. And the Bible writers wrote in the same way. They understood, and they wrote with this whole structure of we got to have clarity, and we've got to have details, and we've got to button it up and have a good conclusion. And then what they did is one of their literary styles was to take that structure and amplify it and take it to the next level. So they came up with a new structure, and this structure is all over the Bible, it's all over ancient writing, it's everywhere, it's very common. They came up with this structure where they would still use those three parts, but they would structure it like an arrow or a greater than sign. So they'd structure it like this, where you have a beginning, and it goes to the middle, and then that flows to the end. And when they did this, they even came up with another step to this whole thing where they said, if you want to know the point of a passage, or the point of a story, or the point of whatever's being written, then you look toward the middle. Because if you want to know what it says, you look at the middle. And then, if you want to know how to do what the middle says, you look at the beginning and the end. So the point of the whole story is in the middle, but if you want to know how to do it, you look at the beginning and the end. Okay, so Isaiah 40 is one of these, the passage that we just looked at. And so if we want to know the point of Isaiah 40, the first part, we would look where? The middle. The middle verse of Isaiah chapter 40 is shout. A voice said, shout. I asked, what should I shout? A bit odd, but think about this. Isaiah is the I in this passage. God is talking to Isaiah, and God is the voice saying, shout. Isaiah responds with, well, what should I shout? The idea is, God wants Isaiah and all the people to shout and be excited and tell about and spread the words about something. So what are they supposed to shout about? I don't know. So where do we look? The beginning and the end. And what's in the first verse and the last verse of this whole passage? Those are the two verses in the chapter on gentleness. There's this whole mess of verses about God's power because we know God's power. God created the world. God did these amazing things. God does good stuff. God can do anything. We know God's power. We know God's strength. But if we want to know what to tell about God and what to shout so that people get it, we shout about God's gentleness. Now, what's really cool is, so oftentimes I think of gentleness, as sweet and calm and soft and tender, which it is. But gentleness is then meshed together with these other verses that are all about God's power. And I don't know about you, but I think of gentleness as this thing that's over here, and power is way over here. And they're never meant to be together. But Isaiah chapter 40 puts them together. And it suggests that maybe gentleness is not weak. Maybe gentleness is not powerless. Maybe gentleness has a lot of strength to it. And this is where the Bible teaches us about gentleness. What the Bible says about gentleness is using God's power under control. Because we all know that if we use certain power out of control, it can be dangerous. But if we use power under control, then that can be faithful. And the power that God gives us, we have power to love, we have power to serve, we have power to be faithful, we have power to hope, we have power to influence, we have power to use all the things that God gives us for one reason or another. And out of control power, all that stuff out of control, that can be dangerous. It can threaten relationships, it can do all kinds of things. But that power under control, that's gentleness. That's what God encourages, to use God's power under control. For many years, when my sister and I were growing up, from the time we were born to the time that we left home, there was something that we did not have. We never had a pet. And some people are shocked by that. Like, how could you survive without a pet? And we grew up a little strange, but we survived, and we grew up without a pet. So what happened is my sister and I both left home, and we had completely opposite reactions to our growing up years. My sister, she turned her house into a zoo. She did. I mean, she's had salamanders, she's had geckos, she's had frogs, she's had dogs and chickens, and you name it, she's had the animal. I have not ever had a pet. Not that I don't want one, not someday, but I just never had a pet. So, my sister had this life and I had that, and that's okay. She's great, and so I'm fine with that. But I'm wondering, how many of you have a pet right now? Okay, how many have dogs? Okay, how many have cats? Okay, how many have another kind of pet? Okay, we have a few. Now, we all know, right, whether we have a pet or not, what an untrained pet looks like or a trained pet looks like, right? We all know an untrained pet when we see one, and we all know a good trained pet when we see one. There's a brilliant Bible scholar who wrote this about gentleness. He said, "Gentleness is an animal which has been domesticated, which has been trained to obey the word of command, which has learned to answer to the reins. Gentleness is an animal which has learned to accept control." Does the trained animal or the obedient pet, does it still have power? Yes, it still has strength, but it's strength under control because it's been trained. Gentleness is power and strength and all the gifts and all the great things that God gives us. It's just within control. Because there's times when it's appropriate to use and times when it's not. And gentleness is the wisdom and the understanding to know when to use that power. Most of the time gentleness appears in the Bible. It's interesting that it appears in situations where people are not speaking nicely to each other. They're actually speaking quite nasty to each other. And it's oftentimes in the letters of Paul where Paul says, you got to be gentle, speak with gentleness. And speak to each other with gentleness is what Paul says over and over. Speak to each other with gentleness. He's saying, don't let your words be harsh. Don't be so strong or so harsh in your tone. But still say what needs to be said. Because nowhere in those passages does Paul say, don't say it. He just says, say it in this way so that it gets through. Even more interesting than that, I think, is every time in the Bible that gentleness comes up, every time, it has to do with relationships between people. Every time gentleness comes up, it has to do with relationships between people. So if we use power under control, that has the potential to keep relationships going. But if we use power out of control, we run the risk of ruining relationships. And this gentleness under control and what's at stake is people. Because I think what gentleness is two things. It's a caution and it's a push. It's a caution to not take power too far and say, hey, hold back or be careful. But at the same time, and for some of us in some situations, it's a push to say, you still got power. Don't be quiet. Don't not use it. Use the power, but just do it under control. I mean, does that make sense? There's a caution, but then there's also a push. And gentleness is both of those. There's a great example of this in 1 Peter chapter 3. And Paul is talking to people about how do you tell people about your faith. And Paul says, and if someone asks about your hope as a believer, always be ready to explain it, but do this in a gentle and respectful way. Does Paul say, if somebody wants you to defend your faith, be quiet? Does he say, don't tell them? No, he's not saying don't use the power, don't use your experience, or don't use what God's given you. He says do it, but just do it under control. So, where are you? Are you in the I need caution? Or are you in the I need a push? Because we all need a different one at different times and different places. Do you need a caution at home, or do you need a push at home? Do you need to say what needs to be said, or do you just need to temper it? Do you need to be cautious, or do you need to be pushed? Gentleness, God's power under control. What does that look like at an office or with employees or with supervisors? What does it mean to be gentle? Or gentleness, God's power under control. What does that look like at school with friends or with teachers or with classmates or on the field? Or what does God's power under control look like with kids or grandkids or siblings or other people at home? God's given us an incredible power, and we're to use that power, the love and the joy and the peace and the patience and the kindness that God's given and blessed us with, but use it under control. Let's pray.